Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for gracing us on this special morning. And I hope you're all doing well. It's Monday morning, Daled Tammuz, Tavshin Pei Aleph, the 4th of Tammuz, 5781. June 14th, 2021. If you open your source sheets, we are on page 147. Seif Hey. Seif Hey. You see the third line from the top, page 147. The Chevra on Zoom, give me a thumbs up that you could see me and hear me. Beautiful. Okay. So we are in the middle of the Maamer, Lehavin Inyan Taanas Hameraglim, to understand the deeper dialogue between the spies, the 10 spies and the 2 other spies, from Shabbos Parshas Shlach Tavshin Tesvav, Shabbos Shlach 5715, 1955, presented by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose Yom HaYilula, whose yahrzeit was commemorated yesterday, Gimel Tammuz, the 3rd of Tammuz. And let's continue inside. We're going to continue inside today. So if you didn't open your source sheet, please do that. And you can do that by going to, as usual, by going to theyeshiva.net, theyeshiva.net, and you'll see the top video. It says Monday class, and you have on top of the video view source sheets, or below the video you can download your source sheets. Again, page 147, Seif Hey. So let's recall, we left off last time with a question. After all the explanations, we left off with a question. In this Maamer of Shlach, Tavshin Tesvav by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Shlach 1955. What was the question that we were left off with? There was a long explanation about the nature and the relationship of what we call Sechel, Machshava, and Midos. Sechel means my ideas, even my perspectives, even my values. These are ideas that I consider to be true. Machshava is thought, my thoughts. Midos, what are Midos? So the Maamer explained that Midos are really deeper than all ideas, because ideas are what my mind discovers, realizes, discerns, explores, dissects, and reaches certain conclusions. So this is something in the terminology of Chassidus that my soul possesses. He says, Midos is not what my mind possesses or cultivates or discovers. It's rather what my mind is. Or in the language of Chassidus, it's not what my soul possesses, it is my soul. And that's why we translated it as primal drives. Primal drives are the Midos. These are pre-verbal. These are pre-thought. This is me. If you remember the language that was used, I hope you had a chance to review it. If you didn't have a chance, it would still be a very good idea to review it. He said that Midos are his galus ha'hashrosha pshuta be'etzem hanefesh. Words Words are very potent, very powerful. Midos are a mirror of characteristics, of drives that are embedded, that are rooted in the core of my soul. And he said, you have to respect them, you can't change them. Ideas, you always want to open them up to growth. You always want to open your brain to new information, to new data, to new angles, to new perspectives, to a new layer of depth. A mind that remains stuck and says the truth of yesterday remains the truth for eternity is a mind that is paralyzed, that is not doing its function. The whole idea of Sechel, I'm talking here the mind in terms of its capacity to learn about reality. Whatever that reality is, it could be science, it can be physics, it could be psychology, it could be philosophy, it could be cosmology, it could be astrophysics, it could be geology, botany. Be about yourself, about your life, about your job, about your marriage, about your children, about your emotions. The job of Sechel is always to discover and explore more. And you may discover, like Columbus, you may discover one day the Americas. It's always a path of self-discovery, discovery of reality. I always want to look, to go one step deeper, to maybe focus on a detail that I haven't realized, to discover new things, to rediscover old things, but cast a new light on them. It's full of shinuyim, it's full of changes. That's the vitality and the beauty of Sechel, of learning, the intellectual pursuit of mankind, collectively and individually. The greatest enemy of learning is, as the pasuk says in Shoftim, Hashoichad Ya'aver, bribery blinds. And the Rebbe used to say, he once did a whole talk about this in Parshas Shlach, it's in Likutei Sichos 23, that the bribery that blinds, it says, Hashoichad Ya'aver enei chachamim v'salav divrei tzadikim. Bribery blinds the eyes of the wise, of the sages, and it distorts the words of the righteous. But if I'm taking bribery, what righteous person am I? What tzaddik or chacham am I? So therefore, Rashi and others struggle with these words. And one of the explanations in this, that bribery here is referring not only to money, to monetary bribery. Of course, that bribery is forbidden, but the Torah is cautioning us against a much deeper and more subtle, and in some ways, because it's more subtle, it's also more lethal and more dangerous bribery. And that's the bribery of what we call today confirmation bias. You know what confirmation bias is? I'm looking not for truth, I'm looking to get a confirmation on my previous beliefs or my previous ideas. And we do this unconsciously. It's not necessarily I'm doing it because I'm a bad guy. No, these are the beliefs I grew up with. It's beliefs about yourself, about your spouse, that you've had maybe for 30 years, for 20 years. So when I'm looking and examining a situation, I just want to fit it into my old bias. And my bias, I want it to be confirmed. So therefore, my views are by definition tainted. My lenses are already affected. And not that I'm trying to distort truth. It's just my mind is inclined towards a certain direction, and I'm going to choose to see certain things and overlook other things. And we do this constantly. Confirmation bias is so deeply embedded in human nature, as we know today. And this, for the Torah warns against this. Some even want to argue that there's no way of getting out of it. How do you get out of confirmation bias? Or to put it in the language of Chassidus, when the Midos are involved in Sechel, doesn't that affect the Sechel? It becomes about a subjective search rather than an objective search. And is there even such a thing as an objective search? So therefore, when somebody becomes aware of this, at least you're aware of it. The role of Sechel and Moichin is to always discover and rediscover and rediscover. and dismiss the old for the sake of the new, in the good sense that I want to always find a deeper level and another angle and another detail, etc. That's all the world of Sechel. The world of Midos, this is pre-verbal, pre-machshava, pre-Sechel, Zoba, Tika, Achid, Vitalia, in the language of Zoyar. You're talking here with the Pnimius, you're talking here with Dashrosh, Pshuta, Betzema, Nefesh. You're talking about my primal drives. There's no change. He says you could change how it's expressed. You could change the software. You can't change the hardware. Even if you could change the hardware, you can't change the chip. And you have to be able to respect that in yourself. You have to be able to respect that in your spouse. You have to be able to respect it in your children. You have to be able to respect it in other people. These are not small changes. A person says, oh, you have these midas. Change them. If you're really in touch with your midas, this is who I am. And that's ultimately what we mean by midas. And that's why they're called midas. Midas means sizes. A midah is a size. It's basically, they say suits come in different sizes. Souls come in different sizes. You could size up the soul through the midah. This sizes up the soul. As he puts it, he says it represents klolos hanefesh. Klolos hanefesh ulefi ofen sharsher mekore in bekava chesed and bekava gvura. This was page 144. It represents you could size up the soul, the color of the soul. And some souls are rooted deeply in chesed, some souls are rooted deeply in gvura, some souls are rooted deeply in tiferes, in netzach, in hoid, yesod, malchus. This is not a detail, it's not a nuance. This is, he says, senem tarum de ganze etzem. And that's why every person has midas, the day you're born, because you have a soul. And that's why midas is not something that belongs to a certain type of people. It's not like intelligence or education or certain skills with ability to reason. These are all things that, we're different. And you can't expect it from a one-month-old baby. Midas, he says, every person. Even a shaita, chassid, from the day you're born. Because you're dealing here with I. And the I is there. The soul is there. And midos are the primal drives of the soul. And it's deeper than any ideas I have. The question now that the Maamer has been developing was, don't we see that there's a whole element of midos which we talk about as being guided, mentored, influenced, furthermore, being birthed, coming into existence through Sechel and Machshava. And we have been explaining in the previous classes that there are those midos which we call today emotions, hergation, or a person gets excited about something and it's often very visceral. It's often very palpable, very revealed. It's like, ooh, you're emotional now. Yes, I'm emotional. I'm feeling an emotion. Feeling as feeling it in my body. And these are always preceded by thoughts and by ideas. The thoughts are preceded by ideas. The ideas, of course, produce thoughts. Mm-hmm. And every emotion could be traced back. And Sechel has a lot what to say there. And he started to explain that, number one, Sechel doesn't create the midah, but Sechel is what allows the midah to come out, to be birthed, to emerge in its full glory and full power. Sechel and machshava, ideas and thoughts, bring out the midah. They birth it like a mother births a baby. But what's the role of the midwife? The midwife doesn't create the baby. The midwife helps the baby come out. He says that's the role of Sechel. Sechel doesn't create the baby. Sechel is like the midwife that brings out the baby. Sechel is often compared to a mother, not a midwife. But even then, the mother doesn't create the soul of the baby. The mother facilitates it. The mother makes the arrangements, no small feat. The embryo gets developed in her. But there's factors outside of mommy and tati, especially the soul. The Gemara says, person has three partners, right? Every person, there's the tati and mommy and God. Gimel shutfim. Sechel also, he says, it's like somebody who points out to you that in this room, in this cellar, there exists an oitzer, a gewaldige treasure that's going to change your life, and you run there with excitement. This person didn't create your desire for the treasure. This person didn't create the excitement. Yes, they did. They said it's there, and you started to run. It's like you'll tell the child the cotton candy is there, and the kid gets excited and starts running. You didn't create the desire for the cotton candy. The sweet tooth did. But you pointed it out. As long as he did not know that there's cotton candy there, or the adult did not know that there's a great treasure there, that excitement would have remained dormant. But because you pointed out, you labeled that place, and you said, hey, there's a lot of good stuff there that you think are good. So now my Midos emerge in their full glory. I'm getting excited, either in the positive or in the negative. You could point out about danger, and then suddenly I'm experiencing repulsion or fear, sadness. I retreat. I want to go away from it. That's like Gvura. Chesed is getting close, Gvura is getting far. So the Sechel and the Machshava channel the primal drives and apply it to certain realities in certain situations and allow it to emerge in a person's reality. Then there is deeper impacts that Sechel has on Midos. And he went through the three stages of how our Midos develop: Ibur, Yenika, Moichin, a state we call pregnancy, a state we call nursing, a state we call full mature development. I connected it to what I think is connected to the three dimensions of the amygdala, the limbic brain, the prefrontal cortex. And the bottom line is, after everything, how does Sechel have any effect on Midos? When ultimately we're saying that Midos are rooted in a much deeper and more authentic and real place in the soul than Sechel. Even the fact that Sechel, as he says, creates a development in the Midos, that certainly is strange. He says even the fact that Sechel is like a maramakim, because there's a few different aspects of this Maamer about how Sechel affects or influences or guides or mentors Midos. It's very intricate. But any step of the way, any way you look at it, even the most basic idea, that Sechel can point a finger and say there, and the Midos respond. My primal drives ultimately are affected by that, affected in the sense that they know where and how to be expressed as a result of Sechel. Sechel is the one that labels things and categorize things. That itself is strange. Why does Midos have that allegiance? How does Sechel get this capacity to own anything of the Midos? Now we continue, Seif Hey, page 147. Please open your source sheets. If you didn't do that yet, you can go to theyeshiva.net. And this class on the Meraglim, you could, if you're going to watch it later, you can do a search of recent classes. We have recent classes if you come in a few days, or if you come later, it's going to be in the Meraglim. You could search Meraglim. And it's page 147. But now if you go to the home page, you'll see Class Monday, and you open it up, and on top, there's view source sheets on top of the video, and below the video, there's download source sheets. The explanation in all of this is, the first explanation, the mitzazeh, sham midasim l'mayla me'amoichin, hine be'emes lo shayach shetiyeh pulas ha'seichel ba'amidus. You're right. Since Midos are so much deeper and higher than Moichin, Midos represent my primal, internal, pre-verbal, pre-machshava, pre-sechel drives. So therefore, really, Sechel cannot have any effect. No ideas can affect Midas. This is so important to understand. This means that all the explanations in the world, all the rationalizations in the world, all the justifications in the world, all the proofs in the world will not affect Midas. It just can't be. Because Midas comes from an earlier version of me. And what I mean by an earlier version, I don't mean an earlier version, literally an earlier version of me. You know, the way I was in a different reincarnation. An earlier version of me means it comes from a deeper version of me, a much deeper place in me. Sechel doesn't have access to it. Again, Sechel is what the soul possesses. Midos is what the soul is. It's very different creatures. So Sechel is great, but it's a different world. The whole previous section in the Maamer and our previous classes explained how Sechel has an impact on Midos in terms of birthing them and revealing them. Every midah, every emotion that you have, which can always be traced back to a primal drive, is ultimately emerging into the world, into your body, into your system, into your consciousness, through ideas and thoughts. That's the fact. So true, the Midos and their source are beyond Sechel, but yet we see that Sechel impacts their flow, impacts even the way they're expressed, impacts what emerges, and as we learned before, also impacts the nature of the midah itself, if it's going to be a state of ibur, a state of yenika, a state of moichin. That's all true, he says, but ein ze b'hamidas k'moishem b'takfim. Sechel will never touch or tamper or affect the midah the way it is in its full intensity. Hainu k'moish hamidas he mitzativam. The way the Midos are in their own primal state, it's impossible that Sechel will have an impact on them. Sechel has nothing to say. Sechel can't mitigate it or compromise it or dilute it. Only after the Midos go through a process of weakening, the Kashamidas and Bechlishus, as I shayach sheteh ben polos ha-sechel binyan agilei v'agdala. Only when Midos are experience a chalishus. Chalishus in Hebrew means a weakness. They're not anymore shining in their full intensity. They're weak. Then Sechel can kick in and affect them. Affect them in what sense? Is responsible for birthing the Midos from a place of concealment into a place of revelation, and even for developing them. This is important to understand, and it's an obvious truth also for another reason. Sechel is what's called an pnimi. What does it mean, an pnimi? A light that affects a person in an internalized fashion. And because it's a type of energy, what's called an pnimi, one that enters into you in an internalized way, it's going to be explained, it's going to become clear in a moment. So this means, this brings us to the conclusion that the way Sechel affects things and a person is by becoming enclosed and manifested. But when your primal drives are so intense, they are primal, they are in their primal state, as a lo shayach klal shli slabish behem ha-sechel. Then Sechel cannot become enclosed inside of them. Why? Because since Midos are opposite than Sechel, Sechel cannot become enclosed in them to become their very identity. But the way Sechel affects things is by it becoming the identity of that which it affects. That's what Pnimi is. You have to say, the only way Sechel can affect is by going in, by becoming part of that which it wants to affect. And when Midos are b'toikif, there's no way Sechel can do that. So when can Sechel do that? When can Sechel have a relationship with Midos? It's only kasher Midos and bechlishus. When there's Midos are weak, as shayach gam kin Sechel yiful ala Midos. Then Sechel can affect them. When the Midos are intense. The fact is that Sechel simply doesn't have the capacity to affect them, and they have their expression in Yiddish. Because the Rebbe said the Maamer in Yiddish, so they're written in Hebrew, but there's some Yiddish expressions that you cannot avoid, you cannot ignore. The Rebbe said, Sechel is not a balabos on the Midos. Midos don't show their allegiance. They're not subservient to Sechel. On the contrary, they'll teach Sechel. They're not going to allow Sechel to teach them. Hine oivzes is another point. She'ena Sechel nimtze behem klal. It's not just Sechel doesn't have what to say because you're not my boss. Midos, my primal drives, will not surrender to Sechel. They come from a deeper place. You're not my boss. It's like I was in this office before you were born. You come in now, Sechel comes in now. You came too late, my dear.
Lost track of which one. I lost track of Sechel Midos right now. I just lost track of Sechel and Midos. Which is Sechel and which is Midos in the Maamer right now?
Sechel, the translation of Sechel is an ideas,
yeah.
and Midos are the primal drives of a person.
Yeah, now what's the Rebbe saying?
So he says, so here we have two things. Number one, Sechel is not a balabas. You're not my balabas. You're not, Midos turns to Sechel and says, Midos is saying, you're not my master, you're not my boss. I'm not listening, I don't have to listen to you. I've been running this company in the office, before you were born. Sechel. Sechel comes in, he's a big shot, he's a very big analyst, he understands things. Midos looks and says, you ain't the boss in this area. When it comes to me, the person, Midos says, I predate you, I'm an earlier version.
So Midos is using Sechel to prove to Sechel that...
If anything, I'll tell you how to think, you won't tell me how to feel.
But Midos is using Sechel. Right.
So that's number one. Number two, here he adds, there's something deeper. It's not only that Sechel is not a balabos on the Midos, the way they are in their primal form. It's that the Sechel is not even present in them. Why? Because Sechel comes out only in a way of pnimius, which means in a way that the recipient actually absorbs it within its identity. Therefore, only when the Midos are not in their primal state, and therefore they are not in their original intensity, they have been mitigated, they have been diluted, they have been compromised, they have become weakened. Now Sechel can impact them. Now the Sechel can actually be present in them, find expression through them, and not just be present but affect them. What he's saying here is as follows. Midos, in their primal state, Sechel can't do anything. Sorry, there's nothing you can do. For two reasons. First of all, Midos originate in a deeper space of the I. And therefore Sechel, so to speak, is a runner-up. He came in second. He didn't come in first. Number two can't tell number one what to do. The Midos come from a deeper place in the eye. And therefore, they have the staying power. They own my life in a much more real way. So Sechel could come and try to give opinions and give perspectives and sound very eloquent. But it's not going to reach the place of the Midah. What is even more, he said, it's not just Sechel is not a balabas. In the real world of Midos, there's no such a thing as Sechel. It doesn't exist. It's not like we're competing who's the owner, and you're saying, you got to listen to me, and I'm saying, I don't got to listen to you. It's much deeper than that. In the world of primal Midos, he says, Sechel doesn't exist. It's not just you're not a balabas, you're a nobody, you don't even exist. Your reality has never reached me. It's so much more rich. It's not just the primal drives, tell Sechel, sorry, I was here before, I run this show. I run this guy's life. This is me, right? Don't mess with my genes. This is who you are. I'm here before you. No, it's much more than that. That's true, but it's much deeper than that. The Midos don't even know that there's such a thing as Sechel. In the world of real Midos, he says, Sechel doesn't even exist. Not only does it not have a say, sometimes you'll have an argument between people. There'll be a court, and you have different jurors, different judges, everyone has different perspectives. You may be proven wrong. You may have a board meeting, and different people have different opinions, different perspectives. You may be proven wrong, or they may reject your opinion, but they listen to your opinion. Here, he says, Midos doesn't even listen to Sechel. Sechel doesn't exist in its world. What's the proof for this? So it's a very subtle, very, very deep idea. The way Sechel influences is what's called in the language of Chabad Chassidus, pnimi. Pnimi means there's two ways of influencing. One is called power, and one is called influence. Power is the idea that for whatever reason, I have a mastery over another person. Let's say a commander-in-chief and the soldiers. And I say, go. So you go. I'm right, I'm wrong, you agree with me, you don't agree with me. In an army, if you're going to wait till every soldier agrees with every commandment of the commander during a war, Khalila, you're not going to be able to run an army. There's a hierarchy, yeah. The same is true in every institution, every company. There's the person who makes the decisions. The people under may agree, they may not agree. That's not what Sechel is. That's called Ratzon. That's how Ratzon works. This is what I want. This is what you're going to do. The idea of Sechel is you can't command your students to understand what you're saying. I told you to understand. I could command a soldier to go. Move from this position to this position. To go to this and this place and try to fulfill this and this task. But if I'm using Sechel, the idea of Sechel is I'm trying to make you understand that you should go because of you, not because of me. That's what Sechel is. That's called pnimi. There's makif and pnimi. There's an energy that I give to you, but it's one that is above you. It doesn't become part of you. Pnimi means a type of energy where I'm not here to instruct, I'm here to explain. They tell a story that Herman Wouk, you remember the late Herman Wouk, who passed away not long ago, I think at the age of 106. He authored This Is My God, Cain's Mutiny, many, many classic works, was one of the great literary figures of the United States of America in the 20th century, in the beginning of the 21st century. So Herman Wouk...
Exodus?
Yeah,
also?
Exodus. Yeah. Herman Wouk he lived Palm Springs. And he just passed away. He was 106. He was a Yid who was a Torah observant Jew. And he's really one of the pioneers in the 50s where he wrote a book, This Is My God. He really introduced, authentic Torah Judaism to an audience that was really it was a very unique effort those days. So Herman Wouk had a relationship with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and I saw once, or I heard from him once, I don't remember, many years ago, that he once asked the Rebbe in the 1950s, He says Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he was realizing the vision and the dream of the Rebbe to change America and to change the world, he said, Lubavitcher Rebbe, this is the 50s, you have to remember, that Judaism, especially Orthodox Judaism, was completely on the defense, mamash on the defense, and not very successful. You know, it was losing its adherents daily. And assimilation was growing then. I mean, it's important to understand, you know, in the 1950s, intermarriage in America was very, very small numbers. By the 1960s, everything changed, and then certainly the 70s. Never mind the 80s. But this is in the 50s. He says, Lubavitcher Rebbe, do you really think you can tell the American youth what to do? You think you're going to tell them what to do? The Rebbe looked at him and he said, the American youth, you can't tell to do anything. You can explain to them to do everything. You can't tell them to do anything. You can explain to them to do everything. Or you can show them. That's the difference. Sechel works in a way that I'm not here to force you. I'm here to explain. And that's what a real class is. What's the idea of transmitting ideas? Transmitting ideas means if it's my idea and it's not your idea, I didn't transmit it. Sechel is something, if I explain something and you got it, you agree with me, now it's yours as much as it's mine. Now you can become a teacher of it. That's how Sechel works. Sechel doesn't work by commanding you, by nullifying you, by disregarding you. No. Sechel works in a way, this is called pnimi. It's an that goes into your pnimius. It becomes malubish in you. In other words, it becomes part of your identity. See, that's the only way Sechel works. So he says it's not just that Sechel is not a balabas on Midos. It's not even present in the world of Midos. Because the only way Sechel has an influence is when it becomes part of that thing that it impacts. And the Midos are completely in a different world. They're opposite of the Sechel. So the Sechel is not becoming the Midah. So the Sechel doesn't even show up in the life of the Midah. So the Sechel doesn't even show up. It's not just the Sechel is not a master. Sechel doesn't even exist in the world of primal drives. In the world of real Midos. Sechel not only doesn't have a say because it's weak, it doesn't even show up. It doesn't even exist. And that's why when people start negotiating themselves or other people out of their primal drives, it's so futile because it's a complete lack of respect and understanding of what your primal drives are like. And people try to do this. They try to do it with themselves. They do it with their spouses. They do it with their kids. I'm going to negotiate with you to get rid of your things that are a part of who you are. So therefore, whenever we speak about the impact of Sechel on Midos, says the Rebbe, it's only when the Midos are in a weaker state. When they are in their prime grill, when they are in their prime grill, in their prime intensity, in their primal state. You know, you say a person in his prime, in her prime. When the Midos are in their prime, b'toikef, Sechel can't get close. Everything we talk about, Sechel affecting Midos, it's in a stage where Midos are much weaker. When the Midos are weak, in other words, that intensity is not there. It's not there. That primal sense of this is who I am has become weakened. Now they're vulnerable to the impact of Midos, to the impact of Sechel. Which brings us to a much deeper question. Granted, Zol Zayin, you're not touching Midos in their prime. Okay. When they're weaker and they're more vulnerable, now they allow, Sechel now could yield its influence and can arrive in their space and, so to speak, impact them. Affect their maturity, affect their development, affect their birthing, in all the ways that Sechel affect Midos. But we now come to a much more primal question. That's Sivav, 147, the last paragraph. We're still now with a major question. The afshek Hashem midasem bechlish Sechel is behem pa'ulos Sechel mikol makom haguf v'tzarich Lehavin may ayin ba chlishus ba Midos. You explained to me that when my Midos are weakened, then Sechel can affect them and impact them. But I want to understand this itself. How do Midos go through this process of becoming weakened? What happens? What happens to this primal state of my drives that it goes through a process where it loses its intensity, it loses its originality, it loses its connection with the source. It's much weaker and therefore more vulnerable. You can't say that maybe this is also part of the impact of your mind as the mind develops intellectually. It weakens the Midos. We just explained in this whole Maamer that when Midos are in their prime, Sechel can't enclose itself in them and therefore can't affect them. So how do Midos become weak that Sechel could impact them? You can't tell me that itself comes from Sechel, because as we said, for Midos in their prime to be affected by Sechel is impossible. So what creates this weakness in Midos that the Sechel could now come in and influence them? And here, the Maamer comes to its final idea. This next piece, we come to the final idea of understanding what Sechel does to Midos. How is there a weakness in Midos? And with this, everything comes full circle, Be'ezer Hashem, and we'll be able to appreciate the full picture, which will then allow us to understand the deeper conflict between the 10 spies and the 2 spies. If you can go into Eretz Yisrael, you can't go into Eretz Yisrael. Which was really a fight, not just about geography and not just about the physical story of going into the land, but really a question about the future of civilization in the terms of what we can expect and not expect in human development.
Is Sechel Chachma, Bina, and Das?
Yeah. Sechel is Chachma, Bina, Das. Chachma, Bina, Das is 3 stages in the cognitive experience. And then there is Midos, which are associated with Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod. Question. Right. The explanations, rationalizations, will never affect original individual Midos or general human Midos. Right, that's correct. That's what we're saying. Any idea then how to negotiate with Midos when they are in first gear? Great question. So the point that we're learning now, till now, there's still going to be another major point in this Maamer. You have to respect your Midos in their primal state. You have to respect them. These are my primal drives. I cannot change them. I could learn about them. I could see how they're being channeled. I can learn about my needs, my yearnings, my longings, my desires. I could see, right, what those needs are and how in my experience they're being met. That's a very important process. Because what often happens is, let's go back to that idea we discussed, I think 2 classes ago. Every time you have an interaction with somebody and you're feeling as a result emotional, in the positive or in the negative. I'll give an example from the negative because just unfortunately that people relate to immediately. Say your wife tells you something or your husband tells you something and you're feeling a reaction. You're upset, you're angry, you're very uncomfortable. There was a thought that preceded it. There was an idea that preceded it. Why did that idea and that thought get you so angry? So you'll say, well, I feel that, the wife will tell you, I feel that I'm married to somebody that it limits my life. It really limits my life. And as a result of that, it makes it very difficult for me. What is it that limits? What is it? And if the person goes into it, they'll be able to see what that machshava told them, what that thought told them, that produced such an intense emotion. But why does it produce such an intense negative emotion? What's causing that thought to produce such a negative emotion? Why can't you just say, okay, this is what the person is doing to my life, and you know what, I'll enjoy it. And the answer is, the machshava is getting fed from a midah, from a primal drive. I need something. This is who I am. In this machshava is manifested my midah, my primal drive, that's telling the machshava that it's being compromised, and the machshava is trying to facilitate and trying to bring to the fore that this is a danger zone. This person, your husband, your wife, whoever it is, stranger, is really compromising your primal drive. Your primal drive is in danger now. It can't be. That's what's happening. And that's why there's such an intense reaction. So it came through Sechel, it came through Machshava, but it's really fueling, it's channeling your ultimate Midos, which are deeper than Sechel and Machshava. There's an expression in Tanya, in Shara Yichud, chapter 9, I think, that B'chol Midah, B'chol Machshava Melubeshes Midah. Every thought that we have has a primal drive that's feeding it. Every machshava that you have has a primal drive that's in it. Melubash Amidah. When I'm thinking something about another person, when I'm thinking something about an experience, when I'm thinking even about myself, certainly about myself, or another person, and those thoughts are going to lead to certain emotional reactions. There is, in that machshava, there is a midah, a primal drive that's fueling it. That's the engine behind it. So when I become aware of that, I suddenly start realizing, what is it that I'm looking for? What is it that I'm trying to avoid? What is it that I'm afraid of most? What is it that I want most? And then I could say, is this person really the contradiction to that? Is this person really going to help that? The moment I become self-aware of all that, I can do so many things to make life much better. But you have to become aware of it. So at this stage, you're not trying to change your primal drives, you're trying to respect them and see how they're impacting your life on a day-to-day basis and how to create a much more seamless flow. Like the Alter Rebbe explains in a Maamer, God opens the yuds. The yud is the smallest letter, which represents condensing. The energy gets condensed. He opens the yud. He opens the restrictions, because the yud is, the energy becomes contracted and restricted. Tzimtzum. And he satiates every living being with his or her own ratzon. In other words, he allows your ratzon to flow through your yud. Yud is chachma. He opens your yud, and he allows you to experience your actual ratzon. In other words, to allow your thoughts to become aligned, to become channels of what you really want, of what your inner drives are. So you can see it, and you could see the connection, and then you could be wholesome. Because my primal drives, I can't change, I can't alter. I'm not supposed to alter. Next question. Are our midos the same thing as our core wants? In this Maamer, he explains that the midos are those core wants. In a way, he said it's even deeper than want earlier. What determines a person's primal midos to begin with? Is it genetics? Is it your soul's journey? Is it your soul's nature? Also, where does nurture come in? Environment, education, life experience, parental influence. Do they only have an impact on the level of machshava, influencing thought patterns and subsequent expression of those midos? Does that mean that we can only change our awareness, thoughts, and behavior, but never our essential instinctive character? Good question, good question. Very good question. Nice. Beautiful question. So the answer is, let's go through your questions. What determines a person's primal midos? Earlier in the Maamer he said, it's the nature of your soul. It's your soul, and therefore your soul's journey. You say, is it genetics? Yes, it's going to become expressed in genetics as well. Remember, this is the key rule. Biology and spirituality are not separated. The body and the soul are not two distinct realities that happen to make this weird shidduch. The body is a mirror of the soul. The soul is the soul, the engine, the life of the body. So my genetics, your DNA sequence, and your genes are really simply formed in the pattern of your soul. The color of your genes, I'm using the word color just as an allegory, the color of your genes reflects the color of your soul. Because our genes are the divine personal imprint of our individual identity. Your DNA sequence is God's choice to create you. And that's why there's no two people alike. And it's one of the great wonders of creation. You have two people, grew up in the same family, same parents. You have two twins. Mamish twins. But they're still different. Sometimes their personalities are so different, even if they look almost the same, and strangers won't recognize the difference. But we know there's always a difference. That is a mirror of your soul. So yes, it's genetics, but the genetics begins with the deeper place of genetics. It's your spiritual genetics that determines it. It says in Zohar that Beis Shammai, whoever joined the school of Shammai, their souls came from the chamber of Gvura. Those who joined the soul of the house of Hillel, Beis Hillel, their souls came from Chesed. You know, it says in Kabbalah, there's a lot of different customs between Sephardim and Ashkenazim. It has to do with their souls. It's not just, I grew up in the Mediterranean country, I grew up in an Ashkenazi country, they came from Spain, they come from Germany, they came from France, they came from Portugal, they came from Greece, they came from Ukraine. Yes, that's the geography of it, but there's also the spirituality of it. My soul is rooted in a space that needs this custom. You know, I gotta eat rice on Pesach. I'm not saying you have to eat rice on Pesach. Even a Sephardi doesn't have to eat rice on Pesach. But the point is that the different customs and traditions don't only begin with geography. They begin with soul differences. So now you're asking a question. What about nurture? What about life experiences? What about environment? What about education? What about schooling? What about community? What about siblings? What about the house you grew up in? What about parenting? The answer is, the way we're learning the Maamer now, again, we're still going to have to get to the last inning, they have an impact on the level of machshava. They influence my thought patterns, and therefore they influence the subsequent expression of those midos, as you put it. Yes. So I can change my awareness, I can change my thoughts, I can change my behaviors. Can I change my essential midos, my essential instinctive characters, what we're calling primal drives? No. Isn't it true that a person is fully able to control midos through rationality? No. No.
Yeah, but not just any person, but like you said, a baby, like somebody that's advanced.
No. When it says in Tanya that the Beinoni has control over the midos, it's talking about that the Beinoni is in control of thoughts and words and actions. That's what it means.
They put a real good harness on the Midos so that they can't overrun the Beinoni and control him.
But here we're talking about Midos as a person's as a person's, how do we say it? Innermost primal drives. They're not bad. Those Midos are not bad. On the contrary, they're very good. They're very special.
But they need to be channeled in the
channeled, yeah, they have to be channeled. And as he said in the beginning of the Maamer, you have to go back to the beginning, that when we speak about the fact that a person is created to work on their Midos, it's working on how they're channeled, how they're expressed, how they're being manifested. The primal Midos are not, they're never bad. They're never bad. They can come out in ways that can be destructive. That's where I have to work on the channeling.
Two people can have the same core strength of, say, Gevura, expressed as anger, let's say, and one
exactly.
can become very, very physically violent and go crazy like that, and the other one can have the same strength inside of them, but they look completely calm, their body is completely calm, but yet they're either through writing or speaking or doing something, they're expressing that same power of anger and Gevura.
It's a very good example. You have a soul that's very much rooted in Gevura, right? And the way it's channeled, the way my machshava is channeling it, and what I'm experiencing could be a lot of anger, or aggression, or resentment, or a lot of negative energy, maybe hatred, maybe animosity. You know, I'm angry at the world, I'm angry at people, I hate people. It could be channeled through meanness, I'm mean, I'm rude, I'm obnoxious. It could be channeled through selfishness. You know, we learn about Yitzchak and Esav, both were Gvura. But Yitzchak was a very gentle soul. Yitzchak was not an angry, angry man. What did he do with his intensity? What did he do with his Gvura? It could be expressed in a very, very different way. The person could be extremely kind and quiet. And you don't see that aggression and meanness. Why? Not because they're not Gvura. They are Gvura. But actually because they're aware of what their primal drive is, and the way it's fed, and the way it's nurtured, and the way it's facilitated is through means that are actually much more healing and much more productive and much more meaningful to the person. But they still didn't change the core.
I would like to add something.
Ah?
I find it very confusing, the learning here that the Sechel has no influence on the Midos. For the Midos to express themselves, it seems to also need Sechel. This is where I have this.
So when we say that the Midos effect is affected by Sechel, it's only the way the Midos already go through a process of becoming weak. Midos in their prime, the Sechel won't touch. The way the Midos are already not in their primal state, in a weaker state, here, Sechel can indeed have a tremendous impact. As you said, Sechel brings it out, Sechel reveals, Machshava reveals, gives birth to it, not birth to it that it creates it, doesn't create it, but gives birth to it, as we said. Sechel points out, hey, you see that? Danger zone. You see that? Good zone. And the Midos suddenly emerge. In other words, they're listening to Sechel. They're listening to Machshava. But that's only the way the Midos went through a weakening process. The way when you're in touch with Midos in their prime state, He says Sechel has no say. So now the question is, so how does Sechel get ever a say? How do Midos go through this process? How do Midos ever open themselves up to become weaker if Sechel has no influence on them? That's going to be the last piece of the Maamer that we're going to continue Be'ezer Hashem Thursday morning, 7:30 a.m. And tomorrow I'm away, so tomorrow usually we have Tuesday a women's class, but tomorrow, Tuesday, 9:45, there's no women's class. We're going to resume the next year on this Maamer, Be'ezer Hashem, Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Question: aren't there some midos that find very specific expression? Such are found in marital reactions, but the Beinoni manages to fully and directly control the midos.
Excuse me, ask people to unmute because there's a lot of noise coming over.
Okay. If you can unmute. Oh, you mean mute? You mean
right?
mute. The problem is you can't control the midos. If the midos are unmuted, there's no way to mute the midos. Okay, everybody, have a beautiful day and a meaningful day and a great day. Thank you for joining us.